Hello again, and welcome to a Financial Thought Leadership podcast sponsored by CRMNEXT, the banking CRM where we simplify work, drive growth, and deliver on experience. This podcast was meant for those working at a credit union or a community bank and want to hear from peers on how they are doing great work around the nation. Follow us on your favorite podcast platform and stay tuned for a great show. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Banking on Experience. I'm your host, James Gilbert. Today I am joined by Michael Murdoch, who is a marketing manager at Wauna Credit Union in Oregon. He's also the president of Young Credit Union Professionals of Portland and a co-chair of the Awards Committee Advocacy. Michael, welcome back to the show.
I'm so excited to be back on the show. You've had so many guests in between when we were together last and today that have just been so entertaining and fascinating. So I'm very humbled that you thought of old Michael to come back.
Your episode was so good when we had it before. If you haven't had a chance to listen to it, go back and listen to it. I think it was episode like 14 or something like that.
Sounds right.
We'll put it in the comments when we promote this one, but for sure definitely take a listen at that one. Today, we're going to be talking about driving leadership as the younger generation. And this is a pretty hot topic. I think it's something that many people are passionate about. Before I do that, I want to ask you a question so the audience can get to know you on a more personal level.
Here we go.
Who's your hero?
Oh, it's posthumous, but she's still my hero. It's my grandmother. She was a deep, deep lady. She almost knew what you were thinking before you'd even say it, but she inspired me to stick with so many things I was ready to give up on. And to this day, I still can almost hear her voice say, Mikey, you better not give up on that. You know, it's like ingrained in there. So to this day, she still rules part of my heart as a very big hero of mine, but I'm sure she's out there bugging somebody else, but
yeah. Love it. Well, so let's get started. First, let's talk about why did we come up with this topic? And first of all, why are you passionate about this topic?
Yeah. So I've had a lot of experience with young professional work in the credit union industry, including being a brand new young professional coming from a different industry into this industry. And I've definitely learned, and I've seen this tried and true anyway, that the development of leadership at an early age really does contribute greatly to their positive development, right? Not only of young people, but of their communities. And so helping young professionals grow and really concrete those leadership competencies ultimately makes them better to solve community issues, right? And issues for their business. And I've seen that happen time and time again, including through my own development. So if you ever listen to executive leaders who are, the white hair old man over 50, no disrespect, because I know I work for some, but it's quite common to hear that younger people, they see them as having entitled attitudes, right? Or they have bad grammar, or they don't work hard enough, or they want something right now, or they don't have the experience. And that's probably true in some cases, but by and large, I've experienced young professionals really bring enthusiasm and optimism into the workplace, and they understand newer trends better. They challenge authority, especially the old ways, right? And they learn really fast. They're passionate about social ethics and a positive change. So they're also the succession plan, whether you choose to accept that now or when retirement comes a knocking. So in a nutshell, those are some of the things that have really drawn out that passion in me supporting young leaders.
I'm really glad that you mentioned the succession plan, because we talked about this just briefly on a previous episode on, the industry of just credit unions. And I would even go so far to say community banks. The leadership is getting to that age of retirement. And guess what? The door is wide open for this topic. But it's very interesting to me how very little effort is being made by just the industry as a whole to even address this, and talk about it openly. And I think that we got to do it a lot more, right? You are a part of the organization, if I remember correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe it's called the UNCF, right?
No, I'm actually, that was an organization that YCUP recently supported. It's the United Negro College Fund, and I can
Okay.
talk a little bit more about what they are and what they do. But we had chosen them as our recipient of a sponsorship, or excuse me, a charity, that kind of program that we put together. And so this is a great organization. The group has been around for over 70 years. They've raised more than 50 billion, or $5 billion for historically Black colleges and universities. So they offer scholarships, advocacy opportunities, education. So I'm just really proud to be able to support those efforts. They are supporting a lot of that young leadership initiative, especially with our Black communities. And when that focus has shifted so much for bigger institutions, that has been unintentionally focused on other things, away from BIPOC communities. It's been unconsciously biased, or simply put, it's been racist. So they're an amazing organization. They are nationwide. For anybody who flies Alaska Airlines, you'll see that they have just recently jumped on and started sponsoring them. And it's just very, very cool, the work that they do. So I'm proud to, I'm not part of the organization, but I'm proud to be involved with them.
You know what I love about this is you brought up the fact that the younger generation traditionally is more focused on the social injustice that is going on in the world today. And that there's no secret about that. They become the advocates of the change that we need to make. And I think that too often we talk, and we do way too much talking and very little acting. So I love the fact that you brought this organization up, because I do think that it's important to recognize that, to your point, like the younger generation does care about those things. So, we talk about DEI, we talk about all these things, we talk about youthful leadership, but there's rarely action. So what are 1 to 2 steps that credit unions or any financial institution could take today, to make a real impact?
I knew you were going to put me on the spot. No. That's an excellent question, and something every credit union or any institution really should be asking themselves. And I always start with number one is you got to start somewhere. And while my journey to bring more DEI to the credit union industry, it's still young, I'm proud to at least be trying, right? Of course, ego can be a humanity killer, but I've very often had to force myself to remember that there are other people out there, right, who may not benefit from something that I'm benefiting from. And I've recognized my privilege as a cisgen middle-aged white male. And sometimes I mess up, right? And I'll continue to mess up. But number one is definitely to just start that journey. Being in conversation with leadership or general staff, begin a task force on your own, hire an outside consultant or a mediator. There are a lot of them out there popping up, and support organizations in your community which better serve those which your credit union might be ignoring, even if on accident. I have a friend of mine who works in the baby bonnet industry. Just, it's not a tangent. I'm not trying to throw out the conversation, but they have a bonnet line, and a customer reached out and said, the materials that you're making they're not comfortable for Black babies because their hair is different. And that's something that they just didn't even think about, because they're used to just making bonnets for all babies are the same, right? No, they're not. So it takes a moment to sometimes step back and say, okay, what are we missing? And number two, I would say, be true to your mission statement. And why I say that is because generally that's your beacon. That's where you started. And it's so you don't find yourself lost in ratios and member profitability, right? And I've covered a lot of credit union mission statements in my tenure, and they're almost always about helping people be better, right? Helping people grow. And not once have I read one that stated, help these people, but not those people. So you already kind of have a guide that's in your core values of who you are as a credit union. So be guided by who that is and what you stand for, and update them if they're not where you want to be.
I love it. You mentioned one other thing a little bit earlier, and that's unconscious bias. I want to touch on this for just a second. Yeah. I happened to be in a big group with a bunch of different CMOs. It was probably about 2 months ago, and it was me and about 3 other CMOs that were leading the conversation, and we were trying to have an open dialogue and talk about DEI. And a black CMO, we had an India CMO, we had like lots of representation from kind of all over the world, and the call was being recorded. And on this call, it was very interesting to me to see senior level leaders all over the world at some of the biggest companies in the world, and none of them felt comfortable talking about it. So we finally shut off the recording. We shut it off, right? And the first thing that one of the CMOs, who I totally respect, she's one of the greatest ones that I know. Her name's Deanna Ransom. She's the CMO at Televerde. She said, listen, let's talk about unconscious bias because everybody has it. And oh my goodness, it was such a beautiful dialogue to have as leaders sitting there talking about it openly. No one was afraid to talk about, their own bias, because we all have it. And, I'm having the opportunity to kind of lead some DEI training, specifically around like youthful leadership and also diversity just in general. And we did exactly what you mentioned. We brought in a third party, and because why? Because we all have unconscious bias. And you just don't realize that it's there. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't mean that you're racist, but you have it. And if you first have to acknowledge that you have it. And then you have to look at when you go into a room and you make decisions as leaders. This includes the youthful stuff that we're talking about too. You have to realize that naturally you have an unconscious bias towards youth. You have a preconceived notion of the stuff that you talked about, like, oh, well, they're not patient, right? Or they're very focused on social issues. And you have to realize you go into those conversations, and it's sometimes tough as leaders because you have to completely leave it out of the door and realize that you're representing everybody, and you have to throw those biases out at the door. And I love that concept because I think that it's totally applicable to what we're talking about here as well.
100%. That reminds me of two CEOs in the industry. And I don't know if they'll mind me bringing them up, but one is Jill Nowacki, who she was actually one of the founders of the Young Credit Union Professionals of Portland. But she is now a CEO at an organization called Humanity, which helps bring young leaders into leadership roles. But she talked about when she was looking for an exec position back in the day, before she eventually scored one, that the algorithms were set in some of those resume systems to automatically turn down somebody under a certain age and female. And she was just noticing this. She wasn't even getting first interviews.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of certain things that we've set as defaults in certain items that we have not revisited because through our rose-colored glasses, we aren't thinking about those things. And to your point, bringing it out is so important and so special. It's like going to a therapist and like, oh, it was mom this whole time. I feel so, yeah, it's like sometimes you got to bring it out in order to understand it. And you can't be better to other people until you're better to yourself. So recognizing that everybody has it. And again, James, everybody has it. Yes. To what Ransom said. I'm sorry, what was her first name?
Deanna.
Deanna, I want to check her out. It's what makes us human as well. And we have to give ourselves some grace, but at the same time, don't be sorry, change it. Right.
So not to talk about, us at all, but I think that these are good examples. There's somebody in the organization that is on my team that has been a huge advocate for DEI. She's talked about it a lot. It's been something that she's really wanted to focus on. And, she is what I would consider a younger professional. So I'm having her lead it. Like, why get in the way? Like, why does it have to be driven by a leader? Why can't you develop them to the point where they're actually leading the charge? Her name is Victoria Weber. I'm super excited for her because she's also running like a webinar this month that's all around the same topic, right? And I think you've got to, as leaders, one of the things that I think that I wanted to ask you is like, what can they stop doing today? One of the things that I think that they could stop doing today is stop getting in the way and stop letting your unconscious bias dictate how you treat people. And I think that those are two items that I was thinking of off the top of my head on what they could stop doing today. What are some things that you feel like leaders in general, or even just credit unions in general, should stop doing today to make sure that the path forward is successful?
I think they need to stop saying that they support social equality if they're not actually doing anything to back that up. One thing that we can stop doing today is ceasing those comments and blanket statements saying, "Oh, we are progressive. Oh, uh, we do interview young people. We do look for young leadership roles," and then you don't ever see them do it. And if you aren't doing more than that as a committed and united organization, your efforts are not only moot, they kind of become deceivious, right? Which in turn makes you ingenuine, which in turn means that you're not following your mission. And that's a classic example, James. It's Pride. Pride is going on right now, and you see all these organizations changing their logos to rainbow, and that's wonderful.
I'm sorry, I absolutely hate it because I just think it's so disingenuous.
Well, it's Pride and Black Lives Matter. They're not brought to you by Red Bull and the San Antonio Spurs, right? Spurs. They're brought to you by hundreds of thousands of queer people who've had to watch their partners die from AIDS or spat on in the streets or be denied basic human rights. They're brought to you by the deaths of Black people in so many bad situations, so many brutal ways for, systemic racism. And I guess it's all part of the same type of sickness, is that we're not taking a moment to recognize other people for being humans, for being human. Humans are all different. That's what we love about ourselves, is that we are different, right? And so to better answer that question, I would just say stop being disingenuous. And if you're actually wanting that, if you actually believe in that, actually do it. And remember that before simply saying, I'm an ally, right? I think that's a very important thing to remember when you are creating your strategies or steering your organization.
Don't get me wrong, I respect any organization that changes their logo during this time.
Oh, I do too. I
just think that if you're going to do it, like, have some action behind, and I think that that's the key. For us, we still have a really small team here in the US, and so we're trying to address these really deep issues that exist in our country, within the organization, just like bringing in a third party that is experienced with it and giving everyone training. I think that's a great way to start too, is hire a third party to develop training that can actually make an impact on not just the organization as a whole, but individuals. Because remember, if you're addressing that training at the individual level, you're also starting to squash that unconscious bias, which can help the world in a way that you likely would not be able to directly see. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about your own career. What has been the biggest move you've made or want to make to help drive this change?
I will tell you what the biggest turning point in my life regarding a change I'll speak to DEI as well, because I think that's important, but definitely regarding youth in leadership was my experience crashing the GAC. And for anybody who's not aware, most of our listeners should know what that is, but in 2008, a group of young credit union professionals, let me back up. The GAC is the General Affairs Conference. It's the largest gathering of credit union professionals anywhere in the world. And they descend on DC, and it's basically, we're lobbying. And it's the largest lobbyist group out of anybody, including alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, anybody. And over 5,000 people show up. This year, obviously, we couldn't because of COVID, but they're hoping to do it next year. And in 2008, it's been going on a while. In 2008, these young credit union execs said, hey, how come they weren't execs, excuse me, just probably frontline or back office, said, hey, how come there are always these old white men that are going to this? And how come youths aren't going? So they just crashed it. And that's where they gave themselves the name, the Crashers. And there's a cost to be there, but they just showed up and they started going and started talking to legislators. CUNA noticed this and said, hey, CUNA is the Credit Union National Association. They're the ones that run the GAC, and they're our parent association. They said, hey, this is awesome. If you create some sort of program around it, we will pay to come to the conference. And it's been going on ever since. And in 2017, I was lucky enough to be a part of that. I was told no by my credit union, you cannot go, but I went out and got scholarships and applied for it anyway. And I was accepted and came to them and said, well, it's paid for and I'll take vacation. And they let me do it very reluctantly, because I think it was one of those old school, young people don't belong at this, it's restricted. And I got to go, and it was the most amazing experience. And from then on, I was hooked. I joined the Young Credit Union Professionals of Portland. I started being more involved in young credit union professional activities. And they're all over the country, sometimes in the world. There's these YP groups. There's WYCUP, which is World YCUP. And I've now joined one of their, they've got a advisory group that I was recently asked to be on. So that's working with YPs in Tanzania and all over the world. And I think it's invaluable, but that experience was absolutely one of the biggest changes in my career. And I'm so glad that I was a disruptor and didn't listen to my boss. And I'm not saying go out there and don't listen to your bosses. I'm saying that sometimes if it feels right and it's going to advance your career, sometimes you just have to do it.
Oh, that's good. You know, it's interesting because I think that there's a fear. Well, actually, I don't think. I know that there's a fear when it comes to leaders that are senior or more senior, like have a ton of experience. There's a fear that they can't like reveal too much or it takes away their value. And this is especially true in the credit union industry. And the reason I think why, and
especially with succession plans.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. Because, you know, I especially think it's true because typically people at a credit union have a long tenure of their career there.
More often than not.
They often don't leave. And that it's great job security for the credit union and they can develop people. But I think we're missing a big piece here. Like if we're truly wanting to develop the younger generation into future leaders, we have to allow ourselves to get out of the way and realize that your whole goal as a leader is to put people that can do the job better than you.
Absolutely. That's the idea, right?
So, I mean, I just think it's interesting because, you know, I have a pretty young team here at CRMNEXT, and I like it because they bring new ideas to the table. I love putting them in positions where like, hey, like this might be uncomfortable for you for a little bit, but this is going to be a big step forward for you, right? And I think that we have to be able to get out of the way. We have to be able to let them do their thing and develop into the person that they want to become. And I think that if we see them and we see the future of what we see in them, we also can't create roadblocks. And I think that fear is the roadblock. We got to let go of the fear. And we got to realize that there's always an opportunity for somebody to be better. And we are no different as leaders. And we have to realize that.
It scares me a little bit sometimes when I think deeply about this in some of leadership throughout the country and credit unions and that fear. Because I know that in certain cases, I've actually overheard this before, and I won't name names, but I've heard execs and leadership roles, chiefs, say, well, once I retire, you know, that's not really my problem. And it's kind of like, well, it should be your problem because you're leaving a ship, you're leaving the helm open. And why would you not want to invest in somebody at an early age? And another thing I can add to things they need to stop doing now is in their hiring process is stop hiring purely on experience. I don't think that that's appropriate. I mean, obviously, if they have a long tenure and they're exactly what you want, that makes sense. But purely experience or age, those are things we need to stop hiring for. And I used this on the last interview I was in, actually. So sorry to be redundant, everybody, but I love that quote that I saw on LinkedIn. I've seen it pop up a few times. Is the CFO says, what do we do if we invest in somebody and they leave? And the CEO says, well, what if we don't invest in somebody and they stay? And it always just hits me because it reminds me of young people being in leadership. It's like, invest in them. They'll make you proud. Even if they go off and leave and go somewhere else, they'll continue to be a bright star for you. And so, yeah.
We talked a little bit about this in that big group CMO meeting that I had a few months ago, and we talked about how you have to open up your pool of where you pull talent from. And it's interesting because we rely so much on the methods that have been there in the past,
Right.
recruiters, recruiting agencies. This
The
is
way it's always been done.
yeah, this is especially true in like the B2B world, like totally, right? And we also, whether we want to admit it or not, oftentimes people are hired because of their network. Like
Yeah.
that happens more often than anything right now. Well, I'll give you a good example of this. If my network is not diverse, if my network is not young, will diverse people and will young people get hired? The answer to that is absolutely no, they won't. So we have to open up the pool for ourselves as leaders and realize that we need to be tapping into a network that we haven't tapped into before.
Mhm.
And we can't rely on those traditional methods. I don't think, like you brought up the resume algorithms that are out there. I think that you're 100% right. I think that a resume algorithm, if you have on your job listing that you're looking for somebody with, 6 years of experience, and maybe that person has 5, like you're gonna exclude them.
Mhm.
Like that's silly to me.
Or their age, especially. I don't get that one. It's somebody at some point sat down, coded it, and said, well, how about for leadership? And whomever was in charge said, oh, they have to have at least this many years experience. They have to have at least this gender. They have at least this age, or no younger than this. It's there. Those exist, and I think to your point, when your network looks like that, and it's not diverse as far as age or color or anything like that, you're just slowly clipping off your branches until you're just a pool of the same people. And why would any organization that proclaims to be unique and be for social progression want to be that or nurture that? It doesn't, yeah.
I
So
completely agree. I want to end on you talking about like, who do you think does DEI, especially when it comes to the youthful side of things, really well?
yeah, there's some great shops and some great people out there. I'll name a couple of shops. BECU in Washington has been doing a great job. Unitas here in Portland, they've been doing an amazing job. They have a DEI task force that they're really growing on. I also highly recommend reaching out or at least getting to know Richard Romero, the CEO of Seattle's credit union. They actually had they came together to change their board in order to bring DEI, and they are one of the most big success stories. They are one of the most successful success stories, whatever. You know what I'm saying out there. So, but as far as young people, there's Hazel May Overturf, she's at BECU, does a lot of work with the AACUC. Andrea Finley, who's also with the African American Credit Union Coalition. She continues to bring the good fight to young professionals. Ben Herring of the Minnesota Credit Union League, he's just amazing. Dan Marquez, aka Madam Nymphadora, who runs a podcast called Woke-Ass People. They are also a DE, and I crashed with them in 2017. So look up any of those folks and you'll find some great DEI work, as well as some great ideas on how to be involved in youth leadership. What do you do? What's next? If you're frontline or you feel like you're passed over or you're going, I have no space to grow in this industry, reach out to one of these YP groups or chapters and get involved, because you will see that there's more room than you think.
And for the record, everyone should reach out to you. Like you're super humble. What's a great way for people to reach out to you, Michael?
You can email me, michael.murdoch, MURDOCH, at waunafcu.org. You can also reach out to us at YCUP, because we have that diverse network that we were talking about earlier, and we can point you in the right direction. That's just YCUPPDX.com.
Awesome. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast again. For the record, here's a little teaser. We're gonna have Michael's actually gonna be a judge for us on the next writing contest.
I can't
I'm
wait.
so excited to have you, dude. You're gonna be an incredible judge. I can't think of a better person to be on that.
I can't wait for that. Another person I almost forgot to mention is Lauren Colt, the CEO of CU Insight, who's also on that panel as a judge. She ran the crash program for a long time. She's another young professional who showed how it's done, and she's now a CEO, and I think she's younger than me, and that's always impressed me. And she's humble as well, but she's another great person who can hook you up with a
Great
lot of
call
tips.
out. Great call out. Well, we're at time. Michael, thanks again. I appreciate it. Again, if you have not subscribed to the podcast, please do so. Also, if you want to reach out and give us a topic that you want to hear about, I'm all ears. So reach out to me via LinkedIn. I'd be happy to hear from you. We want to get more people that are in the credit union space talking on this podcast. So please reach out to me and let me know if you know anyone who would be of interest. Thank you.